Welcome to Mindful School Marketing, your go-to podcast for personal and professional growth.
We're school marketers, business owners, and moms passionate about connecting other school professionals with tools and strategies for success.
We love solving problems, exploring new ideas, and thinking outside the box. Let's transform your school and life starting right now. Transform your school's admissions and marketing with Inquiry Tracker, the ultimate solution for managing inquiries seamlessly. Discover how you can make your admissions process more efficient and effective with this leading solution.
Welcome to Mindful School Marketing. I'm Aubrey Bursch.
And I'm Tara Clays. Today we're joined by Bridget Johnson. Bridget is the founder of the Dean's Roundtable and Bridget Johnson Coaching and Consulting. She focuses on professional development for student life professionals, including deans of students, class deans, directors, and assistant heads for residential and student life. Welcome, Bridget. We're so glad you're here.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you guys.
Oh my gosh, we appreciate you. And Bridget, I'm especially excited to dive into today's discussion because it's on conflict resolution, which we all know conflict resolution is an everyday part of our lives.
Every day.
Every day. We can't get away. So after seeing how much school leaders loved your session at the Small School Leaders Conference in February, I knew we had to have you on the podcast because I know you have the tools and like some insight that our wonderful school leaders out there in marketing development, and leadership can really take these practical tools and use them for navigating everyday conflicts. So I really wanted to just kick us off by diving directly into a challenge that we often hear from marketing and admissions directors and incoming private schools. Sometimes a project, can stall, like when a head of school or a supervisor or someone in a leadership team or leadership position gets delayed, whether it's them needing more time to review materials or make a decision or provide feedback. And this can leave those marketing and admissions teams feeling kind of stuck and frustrated, even when they're doing everything they can to move it forward. So How would you recommend, given that this is a scenario we hear often, so I'm looking for some tools here, but how would you recommend leaders navigate this type of kind of situation and do so respectfully, using strategies like proactive communication and solution-focused approaches? I know this is your field. You've done amazing work with this, so I'd love to hear your insights on this type of situation.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that happens, across departments. You're waiting on someone and you're feeling a little bit anxious because you've got a lot going on and you can't move forward. You don't feel like you can move forward till you get this information. And so there are a couple of things that I would suggest. One, you already said it, being proactive, establishing a clear timeline up front. Like when you hand this off to someone, let them know, I need this back by. And don't say in 2 hours, right? Give them some time and some runway and have a realistic conversation about the timeline and confirm whether or not that timeline works for them. And then from there, creating a structured follow-up system, and following up, giving gentle reminders while keeping the process moving, a friendly check-in, and then a more direct follow-up, whether it's 3, 5, 7 days, again, kind of working backwards from when you need the information back. Also providing context on why you need the thing that you need and why you need it in that time frame can also be helpful for the folks, because if they don't realize that this is a kind of a chain reaction sort of thing, that you can't move forward until this thing happens, is also super important. And then try as best you can is to use that waiting period productively, like doing some other things in anticipation of getting that information back, so you're not kind of doing all the things at once. Are there things that you can do to kind of help yourself once that you can slot that information in? And then, at the lastly, I would say, giving yourself just a little bit of time or a window to have what I would call provisional approval system. So working with establishing parameters where certain decisions can move forward provisionally without having all of the information, all of the things up front. So can you actually move forward with partial information and what that looks like? Because sometimes partial information is just enough for you to kind of move the project forward.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think it's helpful just in terms of working with other people, not even, just trying to avoid conflict and setting up a good process. Let's say an admissions director feels their events aren't getting the marketing support they need and the marketing team feels stretched thin. How would you advise leaders to use active listening and focusing on interests, not positions, to find a solution?
That's a tough one, to be very honest with you, because you definitely, when you're coming at it from, you care about your department and your position. And so you want to make sure that people understand that, the admissions office really needs this. And sometimes that's not necessarily the best approach. And so thinking about how you can come at it from a let's work together as an organization, and not saying that the admissions office needs this and the admissions or the marketing team needs this and you're not pulling your weight. You understand how important this is for the admissions office. If we kind of take a step back and look kind of more globally about what's needed, I think it's super helpful. And thinking about how we can all work together to achieve the goals that we all have. And then just reminding people again about how we're a part of a whole, and how these sorts of things have a chain reaction. And so if the admissions team can't get what they need, then who else is affected by that? And so, but I really say just kind of taking that global approach and actually taking your department particularly kind of not necessarily out of it, but kind of just pulling back and saying us as a group need to figure out how we can work together to achieve the goals that we all have.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That is that shared interest piece. Like, we're all interested in getting this done. So how do we come together? I'm curious, I think we've talked in the past, and maybe this was when you presented to my small school solutions team, but remaining neutral and objective during conflicts. This is like key, because having worked in schools and worked with schools, like sometimes, it's not always that easy to do. But can you talk
Right.
about a little bit of why this might be, something that we might want to, consider, and how do we avoid getting pulled in the emotional side of conflicts?
Oh,
Either passionate parents, colleagues. I mean, there's
yes.
so many different areas.
So many emotions, right? So little time. And so I think often what happens, and so before I even kind of jump into that, neutral is tricky, right? And so you don't necessarily have to remain neutral. Like, you can have an opinion on something, but keeping the level of emotion down, being even killed as you kind of talk about that, or as you kind of communicate to whatever party, whether it's parents or colleagues. And so not necessarily don't feel like you have to remain neutral, but you do have to kind of get your arms around your emotions. So one, recognizing your emotional triggers yourself and understanding what triggers you and knowing that and being able to practice self-awareness is super important. And we don't talk about that enough. We talk about that with students, but we don't talk about that with adults. And so we need to be trying to model that behavior as well, right? And so not letting our emotions get the best of us. And so recognizing, having a little self-awareness, but also super important, being sure or making sure that you can give yourself a bit of a mental pause. Like just I did, like just taking a second to gather yourself. You don't have to kind of jump right in. You can take a couple of deep breaths. You can count backwards from 10. You can do that in your head, maybe not necessarily out loud, but giving yourself kind of a brief mental pause to say, all right, this is getting pretty heated. I'm going to just kind of regulate myself. I'm going to take a minute before I respond. The next thing I would say is maintaining a fact-based approach. Emotions can stir up a lot of things in us, and we can think about how this made you feel or kind of what happened the last time and what I thought about it. But we really just need to stick with the facts. And if we can do that, that's really helpful. And then also thinking about your language and how you respond. Now, so you don't have to be neutral, but neutral language is really important when you're responding. And so instead of, kind of meeting people where they are, if emotions are escalating, you can say, I understand that this situation is frustrating. Admit that and not say, I know you're angry. You're always angry. Probably shouldn't do it that way. So words matter during this time. And so acknowledging emotions is okay. And trying to de-escalate during that time is super important. And then, focusing conversations on specific observable behaviors rather than assumptions and intentions. we sometimes assume a lot of things, and that just can change the narrative in our minds. And, our minds can do some really interesting gymnastics when we don't have kind of the information to kind of close that gap. And so we start thinking of things and we start spinning and turning things around where it might not be that at all. But we didn't take the time to kind of check ourselves, be, again, self-aware and understanding those triggers, and realize, ooh, I'm starting to go into assumption land here and I need to pull back. And then, if possible, developing a standard protocol for handling certain types of conflicts, certain types of scenarios. Who's in the room when you're having these conversations? Do you give a cap or something of the time frame? Like sometimes, you have, colleagues or parents who want to talk for like 90 minutes about something. Like, ooh, we're going to just not do that. We're going to, kind of cap this conversation and say at the beginning, so it doesn't feel like you're cutting people off, saying, we've got 45 minutes or 35 minutes for this conversation. And at that point, I'm going to have to go off. I just want you to know that ahead of time so you don't feel like I'm being rude. Because sometimes you want people to kind of express their feelings and get their feelings out. But at some point, you need to kind of cut off and move forward.
Thank you. Yes, I'm thinking a lot about this because admittedly, I was just distracted at the beginning of this podcast by an urgent message that came through. And so it's ironic that we talk about active listening and owning up to things and just being honest. So I'm totally guilty of multitasking and getting pulled away. And I think
We
I
all
really
are.
appreciate this. Like
Absolutely.
the context in which this is happening is really helpful for me personally. But let's talk about in the context of an admission slump or marketing miscommunication. One of your strategies is to identify root causes. How would you recommend that teams can dig deeper to uncover the real issues behind those types of things?
The one thing I probably should have started with this is about, establishing relationships is so important. Like making sure that you take the time to get to know the folks that you're working with and not just kind of, know them like, hey, how you doing? But know a little bit more about them. Get a little bit personal, like, how'd your weekend go, or what's going on with your family, or I saw you had to take your dog to the vet. Your dog okay? And so having some of that kind of relational piece is really helpful when you have disagreements or struggles, because we oftentimes can give people grace in those areas or in those times when we know a little bit more about them. It's really hard not to if you just feel like they're always coming in and like demanding things from me, and I don't understand. I don't know who they are, and you haven't had the opportunity or taken the time to know kind of what they're dealing with on their side of things. So being curious and establishing a rapport before conflict arises is really the first thing, to be able to have those candid conversations about what the root or what the real issue is. Because you can say, that doesn't seem like we spent some time together, we worked together. I know based on my experience with you that this seems like there's more here. And so can we talk about that? Would love to, figure out how we can work together on this issue so that, everyone feels good coming out of this conversation. Everyone doesn't always win. Like, let's be clear, that's not how life works. But if we can come to a compromise where we feel like everyone was heard and understood, we understand the reason why we're moving forward in the way that we are, and think about how we can do things differently the next time, or what would be helpful moving forward.
That's so important. And I'm thinking about, I was so guilty when I worked in a school of like wanting to get all my to-do list tasks done and sitting at my desk instead of wanting to go eat lunch with like the faculty and staff and to go to all those, like we started a walking club. Aubrey comes to the walking club. And there were so many times I said no when I should have said yes, because that is when, well, first of all, everyone needs to walk, but that's when you have the like
Relational times.
yes. And
Those are those relational times that are important.
yeah, so I'm thinking to our school leaders, especially our heads of school and stuff that are out there, is like, how do we build that in? Because that is so important. And like that, because when you understand that maybe Josie over there, just snapped at you for something, for a deadline that like maybe you're like an hour or two over, but like you've explained why, it might not have to do with your deadline. There's
At
something
all.
else. Josie's husband's sick. like the dog, had something like, right? So
something.
understanding. I think that's so beautiful and so important for us in leadership positions to understand and value.
You have to be intentional. It doesn't just because we're so busy, it doesn't just naturally happen. Unfortunately, you have to say, okay, today I'm going to spend, half hour, 45 minutes doing X. And, fill in the blank of what X is. That can be different on whatever particular day, whether it's going for a walk or standing outside my office and, just saying hi to folks or going to part of an athletic event or, something that kind of gets you out, gets you talking to people and not just kind of behind your desk in meetings and like going through your checklist. Super important.
So true. And I think that's also what sets us aside from because if that school community is so important, we always say it is, and then making it happen, right? It doesn't
Making
happen.
it
It's
happen. You
making
got
it
to
happen.
walk the walk, talk the talk, right?
Yeah, so important. So this is kind of building on that relational piece. As we're, looking at conflicts and boundaries amidst multiple school teams, how can leaders establish clear expectations and professional conduct standards to create healthier working relationships internally?
Well, so that's a handful right there for sure. But I think it's about kind of how you set things up in the beginning. And so not waiting till conflict arises to talk about how you're going to manage conflict, but trying to have some of those preemptive conversations about what the structure is like or what the approach will be like when we manage conflict, like giving people a set of ground rules and accountability and saying, we've discussed at the beginning of this school year, at the beginning of our time together, how we're going to manage conflict, how we're going to make sure that we're respectful to each other. We're not going to do personal attacks. We're going to deal with the facts. We're going to apologize if we've done something that was wrong. We're all human. We can say, I didn't get that one right. We can have do-overs, right? And so we need to make sure that we give people space and the psychological safety to do that, because sometimes people feel like they can't make a mistake. They can't mess up. It's too high stakes. There's too much going on. And if you are working in that type of environment, first of all, that's really stressful. You're operating at a level that you never relax. And so if you can't relax and you're always high strung, then you're going to snap a lot. You're going to be that person that feels like, God, that person is always like on edge or angry. And, one little thing can set you off because you're already operating at a high level. So taking the time to kind of think about how we respectfully engage and civil discourse, for lack of a better term, ahead of time goes a long way. And people don't think, oh, that's kind of cheesy, or no, we're adults. We know how to do this. We need some help. We need to exercise that muscle if we're not using it. And if you don't talk about it, how are you exercising that muscle? And then when it comes time to use that muscle, some of us are in atrophy because we haven't used it at all. And now we've got a really difficult situation that we're going to spend more time cleaning up on the back end. If you would have just spent some time on the front end talking about these things, could help.
Yeah, communication is so important in every relationship. I'm going to ask you a question that we often wrap up with, and it's kind of a good segue from what you've just been talking about and everything you've talked about, which is mindfulness. Our podcast is called Mindful School Marketing. We like to talk about being mindful, and everything that you've talked about really, centers on that concept. So this may be a bit redundant, but through the lens of this podcast, how do you define mindfulness, as in air quotes here, and how can schools apply this to conflict resolution? Any additional thoughts that you have beyond what you've shared, which I think really does speak to this?
Yeah, and I also sometimes think it's worth repeating. So I'm going to say some of the same things that I said before because I do think it's super important. And so mindfulness in conflict resolution means maintaining awareness of thoughts, feelings, and environmental factors without judgment and responding intentionally rather than reactively. So making sure that you are kind of taking that pause and thinking about, okay, am I triggered here? What's happening? If I am, it's almost like, it's decision trees. If triggered, do this. And so, having those pause points before and having important decisions or responses in those emotional situations, but training your leaders to recognize stress responses during conflict. Again, we don't do that enough. And think about because I've asked people this question in coaching, like, Can you describe for me physically what happens to you? Can you feel it coming on if you're starting to get anxious or upset or frustrated? What does that feel like in your body? Because if you can't see it coming on, by the time it gets there, it's too late, right? It's really hard to kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube once you have already kind of gotten to level 10. And so if you realize at level 5 or 6 that it's coming, what are some of the things that you can do to kind of counteract that? And so talking to people about what those things are and having self-awareness, again, it's so important. And so also thinking about when you're heading into particularly difficult meetings or conversations, think about how you can kind of set the tone early. And some mindful practice you can do. Everyone just kind of take a moment to get kind of settled. A lot of times, especially in schools, you're rushing in from one thing or another. Let's just take a moment here before we kind of jump into the heavy stuff. Can also be important. Taking perspective. Like, one of the things I like to say is sometimes your 6 is my 9. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's just a different perspective. And so if we always come at the conversation thinking that you have the right perspective or right lens, that's hard. That's because we always, first of all, we want diversity of thought in our meetings and on our teams. And we want to make sure that we're giving people the space to be able to express those things too. Again, talking about psychological safety so that we can learn and grow, because there may be some valid points from someone's 9 versus my 6 that I hadn't even considered because I was so focused on 6, And then I would say, lastly, when you're thinking about or when you are kind of in a heated argument or disagreement, I won't say argument because I hope we're not doing a lot of argument on our school campuses, but think about what assumptions you could be making or what could I be missing or what could success look like for everyone involved, and think about that. And I know it's a lot of hard things to think of in the moment. So maybe taking even just one of those could be helpful for you. But also, I would say, lastly, is the debrief. And so if you've had this conversation and you're like, did it go well? Or, oh, I know it didn't go well. Having a debrief with either some folks who were in the room, everyone in the room, or a trusted colleague to kind of go through what happened in these high stress, high pressure situations can really be helpful in getting some perspective and thinking about how to do things differently the next time.
That's so good. And so intentional, right? I think a lot of what you said is intentional and practice. Like that doesn't happen overnight, as you've mentioned.
Nope.
But so important, such an amazing, things that we need as people, humans, and also in school settings and in group settings.
Yes.
So thank you. Now I'm going to transition us to one of our favorite parts of our program, and that's our rapid fire questions. So are
Okay.
you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay. If you could put one book as mandatory reading in the high school curriculum, what would it be?
I like this question. I was like, ooh, this is fun. And so, right now for me, top of mind, and I mentioned it earlier, civil discourse and just being kind. I think we're kind of in a state right now where that's not the priority. And I'd like us to really be intentional about talking to students about that. And so there's a book called Wonder by R.J. Palacio. Wonder is about a student named Augie, a boy with facial differences entering mainstream school for the first time. And it explores kindness through multiple perspectives and showing how small acts of compassion can really impact other lives. And so just, having conversations about being kind, being able to point to something back to students saying, remember when we had that discussion? So I think this would be a great jumping off point for schools to just kind of think about kindness in their schools.
I love that book. I read that
No,
book. So
yay.
yeah, I love it. Yeah, so it's beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. The next question is, what is one app you cannot live without?
All right. So I was gonna be, my mindfulness app is the one I can't live without, but sometimes I do live without it. I don't do it every day. So the one thing I honestly can't live without, I travel quite a bit. And so there's an app called TripIt that I use that captures all of my travel pieces. So whenever I make a reservation, whether it's dinner, car, plane, hotel, it gathers in on one place so I can see my trip at a glance and I'm not like trying to figure out details on the fly, it has been a lifesaver for me. I love it so much.
Ooh,
So
I'm
maybe
looking that
not
up. That's great. Thank you.
necessarily
I've
what
never heard of it.
in line with what we're talking about today, but it makes me less stressful, which I can come into meetings and not snap at people. So
I'm adding that one to I mean, this is super helpful. Well, I mean, not only did we learn about conflict resolution in this wonderful podcast episode, but we also got this amazing app that I'm sure I will.
I love it so much. I really do.
Oh, thanks for sharing. Okay, and next question. What are you reading right now?
Well, also another point of, honesty. I am getting my master's in restorative practices. And so we wrapped up and I'm actually about to start another course at the end of May. So I've taken a break from reading because a lot of reading happened. But I will say the last book that I read that actually was related or a part of my course, Theory of Change, was a book called Immunity to Change. And it was a light bulb moment for me. It's by Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy. And it really talks about the science behind change and why people have a hard time basically changing and like what the neuroscience is behind it. And I was like, I had no idea. And actually just thinking about, things that you want to change for yourself. And they give this they give this example about like there were 75 people who were told explicitly, if you don't change your diet, you're actually not going to be here very long, right? And so, the question is, how many people actually followed the new diet because they knew that literally their life was at stake. It wasn't very many. Yeah, and it wasn't because, they interviewed this one person in particular. He was like, "Well, I don't want to feel like I am like sick or an invalid. So I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want people to tell me that I need to change my diet. I didn't want to exercise because that means that something was wrong with me." And I'm like, "But something is wrong with you. You're not going to live if you don't do it." But, thinking how getting into the mind frame of people and how they think about things was really an eye-opening experience for me. So I thought it was very interesting.
Wonderful. Thank you. Last question is, what great piece of advice would you leave us with today?
Well, I always say this work is challenging, but also rewarding at the same time. But I also, sometimes feel like we get into these modes that we feel like we have to do it all ourselves. And that we can't kind of take a breath and take a step back, or sometimes no is definitely a full sentence. So I would say a couple of things. One, don't feel like you need to do this work alone. Raise your hand for help when you need it. But also make sure that you're taking time to take care of yourself, because that means that if you can go in to these stressful times or stressful situations less hot or triggered, then the better for everyone involved. Because if you can keep a cool head, then hopefully the people in the room can match that with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I just think that's life-changing though. If we all came in with a calm demeanor to work and did our own
little different.
Self-care. Wow. Thank you so much, Bridget, for this. I always enjoy chatting with you. And I know our audience is going to love this. Where can people find you and learn more about what you do?
Absolutely. And so thanks so much for having me. This is always, you guys are so great. I always love chatting with you guys. And so you can find me, deansroundtable.org is our website. You can email me directly at bridget@deansroundtable.org. Would love to hear from you. Happy to be helpful in any way I can.
Thank you. Thanks so
you,
much.
Bridget.
Have a great
Absolutely.
day.
Thanks. You guys too.
This episode is brought to you by Enquiry Tracker. We believe that every inquiry is an opportunity, and with Enquiry Tracker, you can unlock the full potential of your school's enrollment journey.
Say goodbye to missed opportunities and hello to a streamlined admissions process that prioritizes efficiency and effectiveness. Discover the leading solution for school admissions and marketing. Visit inquirytracker.net to book a personalized demo today. That's inquiry with an E, tracker.net.
Thanks for joining us on the Mindful School Marketing Podcast.
We'd love it if you pop into iTunes and leave a review, 5-star preferred. Let us know how you like the show. It helps us improve what we're doing and helps others find us too.